They met long ago, a boy in school and his teacher. But close in age, they spent most of their time not learning history, but talking about music and fucking around. Years later, and still not particularly grown up, they're trying to relive those nerd out sessions. Please humor them, or don't.
Hi, I'm Sean.
I'm Andy. Welcome back.
Yeah, today's a good one.
Today is a good one. It was interesting. Most underrated bands or artists or groups of the 90s.
Yeah.
This is my heyday.
Right.
Right? Like, I started high school in 89, finished high school in 93, finished university in 98 because I took my time. Like, prime music listening years. Obviously, my list is ridiculously long, but I think it's longer because I struggled with what's the criteria for most underrated. Is it a band that was popular at the time but hasn't stood the test of time and nobody knows them anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a group that was a one-hit wonder but should have been better? Is it a group that never made it big?
Right.
Is it like, where do you go with that?
Yeah.
But also, do you take a band that started in the 80s and finished in the 90s as a 90s band?
That's a good question.
Started in the 90s and then went into the 2000s. Are they a 90s band?
Yeah. I guess if the core of their career or like most of their career was in the 90s, then that counts.
Yeah, this is
like so if like their debut album was 1989, but then, everything else.
So this is where I'm kind of going with this, because I think the band Tesla is horribly underrated.
Okay.
But their best albums, they had like 2 decent albums in the 90s, but really I think their best stuff is in the 80s. So do they make my list for the 90s? I said no.
Probably not. Yeah.
I just couldn't justify that. I have a variety of stuff. I'm going to go with easily what I think is the absolute most underrated band of the 90s.
Okay.
Blind Melon. Their debut album, Blind Melon, had one big hit, and that was No Rain. And everybody knows No Rain, and I think that they were kind of taken to be a novelty act because it's kind of it's a very different type song.
Yeah.
But if you really look at that album, and Blind Melon kind of got grouped into the grunge movement, but if you listen to their music, they are not grunge. They have different instrumentation. They're doing different things with acoustic and bringing in mandolin, and they have what I would consider the best song of the 90s, probably one of my top 5 songs of all time, Change, which I think the lyrics are beautiful. I brought it up on a previous podcast, but the song Tones of Home, and then their second album, Soup, has again just phenomenal, Mouthful Cavities, and just fantastic song after song after song. And I think that they were cut short because their lead singer Shannon Hoon OD'd after making the second album, and they've kind of regrouped more recently, like within the past 10 years, with a new singer. The music's still good. It doesn't have everything it did because Shannon Hoon was awesome. But even like the side projects that the other band members have done, I think have been really strong. And I think that Blind Melon gets way overlooked because all people think of is No Rain. And I personally think it's a great song, but it's not anywhere near their best. And I think they get sold short as being innovative and something original in the 90s. So Blind
Right.
Melon to me, like, and you have to check out both Soup and Blind Melon, just killer albums.
Yeah, they were kind of like, I guess, seen as a goofy band or something, right?
Yeah, No Rain has a ding 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 ding. Like it's
Yeah,
just,
exactly. Yeah.
and I think people thought of them as a novelty. But if you really delve in, like, holy crap, do they have a ton of just phenomenal songs.
I guess it's a shame that that song was picked as the first single. Maybe that's kind of what hurt them.
Probably the label didn't do its best with the marketing there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But God, they're good. They also on the Schoolhouse Rocks, like they had bands redo songs from the 70s cartoon Schoolhouse Rocks.
Mhm.
And Blind Melon do 3 is a magic number, and it's fantastic.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's how I know my multiplication table with 3s.
See, rock and roll is educational, and you don't need to stay in school, kids.
No. Just
listen to rock music. Yeah.
Totally. That's exactly the way it is.
I may be a teacher, but it's bullshit. Like,
hey, whatever. You'll be fine. Listen.
You'll be fine.
Yeah,
yeah, like going back to the single thing, it's interesting to think about that because it's like, they probably did think, surely, that that song would help them stand out,
right.
in a good way, compared to all the other stuff that was going on, all the other MTV stuff. But I guess it made them stand out in not a good way, so.
Yeah, I mean, it helped them sell albums, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, it was a hit, I guess.
Brought them some fame and recognition, but the fact that it's the only one people remember, I think, really sells the band short.
Yeah, definitely. Cool, good choice. And you said at the beginning that you're mentioning 5 today, but that's the number 1 most underrated, according to you?
The rest probably won't be ranked, but anybody I get a chance to tell, I'm like, you need to listen to Blind Melon because they're way underrated.
Cool.
Like, not just of the 90s, just generally, they are one of the most underrated bands, I think.
Cool. I think I'll start mine off by dropping a bomb.
Oh.
So, Dr. Dre did not invent G-Funk.
Okay.
He did not. So he was working with NWA and stuff, but he was also on the side working with artists like Above the Law and some other people. And so Above the Law was another gangster rap band from the time. And the producer of that group is Cold 187'em.
Okay.
That's his name. And he worked a lot with Dr. Dre. Basically, Cold 187'em, according to him and according to some other people, and I tend to agree just based on what I'm about to say, he was kind of the first one to try messing around with like samples from Parliament and like some funk. Yep. And then like add deep bass to it and like, basically make the kind of beginnings of G-Funk. And they were working on an album called Black Mafia in around 1991, just as, around the time when Dr. Dre was kind of starting to do his stuff. And because of like label issues and some other problems, Black Mafia wasn't released until later.
Okay.
And so The Chronic came out first. And so he got, Dr. Dre got kind of coined as the guy that not only started the music genre, but actually like coined the term. But that's not true.
Right.
It is true that, Dr. Dre kind of made it awesome and popularized it, but the initial sounds, like even some of the sounds that make Chronic so famous and long lasting, like you can hear some of those sounds in 187's Cold 187's productions.
Okay.
So yeah, Above the Law is very underrated, I think, in that sense. Like people who are really nerdy about gangster rap probably know about them, but the whole G-funk like argument like makes them very underrated. People need to listen to the Black Mafia album to understand that, before Chronic came out, that sound kind of already was starting to exist, but they just got beat.
Well, that happens to so many innovators, not just in music, but inventors in general. If whoever gets the patent first, right? Whoever
Right, yeah.
releases it and gets the
Yeah.
recognition, gets the ownership of it, and the real person who did it.
Yeah. Even if it came out on time, I mean, the Chronic still would have been, better and way more famous as it is,
Right.
But
right.
Black Mafia got kind of forgotten and overlooked, which was, unfortunate.
Sure.
So yeah, the first one, underrated 90s group because of how important they were, but nobody really knows, is Above the
Right.
Law.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess
We're going to get some nasty comments with that bomb that I dropped. I'm hoping for it. I'm ready. Let's argue.
I've heard of Above the Law, but I'm not familiar with their stuff.
It's a hard album it's on YouTube, but it's not on any streaming or anything like that. The CD's impossible to find, it's
Right.
it's just gone, like forgotten kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Do you have it?
I bought the CD, yes.
Yeah.
I found it. It's a piece of history. Nerd alert.
All right. My number 2, again, another band that only put out 2 albums. It's not because anybody died. It's just because the 2 driving forces behind the band just kind of went their separate ways. But Jellyfish.
Okay.
A band that I don't even know if you'd say they had hits in the 90s, but their 2 albums, Belly Button and then Spilt Milk, I think if you're looking for phenomenal, just power pop, super interesting, innovative layers within the music, their harmonies are out of this world, just natural harmonizers. The music is almost theatrical in a sense, somewhat maybe cartoonish, but not really. Yeah. But really well crafted songs. They had a sound all of their own. I can't even attempt to try to name another band that was remotely or has been remotely like Jellyfish. They are their own entity. And some of their music kind of feels like a 70s throwback, but like a jangly 70s, like really happy kind of stuff.
There's like moments of XTC in their songs, maybe.
Yeah, I could hear that.
But that's also like theatrical, goofy, and like whatever, power pop,
Yeah. But I think Jellyfish is way underrated. Interesting, their drummer would play standing up.
Oh yeah, you told me that. I remember that.
And he was this main singer, so very interesting and unique in that way. But
that's cool.
Just a number of great songs. Both of those albums, I don't think, have a bad song on them. And then Sturmer and Manning Jr. were the 2 lead guys in it, and they just kind of split up and went their separate ways. But they are definitely a group that I think everybody should check out. They're fun, it's light, and the orchestration of their music is really good. Some people may say, oh, it's just so overproduced, but I think, yes, it is, but that was what they were trying to do with it. Yeah, I think they truly are underrated in that they never had a hit, unlike Blind Melon, who had no rain. Jellyfish never reached that big audience other than the hardcore people who discovered them and were like, holy
Right.
shit, this is good.
It's definitely like a music nerd band,
Yeah,
you know.
love them.
Yeah.
Love them. I think everybody should take a listen to some Jellyfish.
Cool. Yeah, you kind of did that to me too. Like I knew who they were,
Right.
but I'd never really listened to them, and you were like, do it. And then I realized that, yeah, all of my other music nerd friends are like, yeah, you know.
They're fantastic. One of the best bands of the 90s.
All right, I'll do, my next one will be a guy named AZ.
Okay.
And so, you know, Nas's Illmatic, right?
Yep.
So AZ was basically like Nas's guy.
Oh.
And AZ was featured on Illmatic. He was on the beautifully poignant Life's a Bitch.
Okay.
And he's the first guy that raps on it. So basically, his appearance on Illmatic created a lot of buzz about him. And, you know, when's he going to put out his first album? When's he going to put it out? When's he going to put it out? You know? And then eventually he comes out with Do or Die. And he didn't get his fair due, really. And so he transitioned from mainstream to the indie world.
Okay.
And had a very cool career.
Right.
But, you know, and now, like in later years, people are saying like that first album, Do or Die, it's so great. It's so underrated. People should love it way more. You know, it kind of, the appreciation came a bit later. And now it's like a classic. Yeah. So it's definitely, he's worth checking out, especially that first album.
Okay. Is there a reason it flopped? Like, was it just not promoted
I think maybe
enough?
just,
or had rap moved on beyond that by the time he released it?
I think it's just like the hype was too big, and he was on Illmatic. So like the comparison was just super unfair.
Right.
Yeah. Like Nas's boy that was on Illmatic, he's gonna come out with this amazing debut. It's like, that probably is what it was.
Okay.
It didn't meet people's expectations, like overly huge expectations, I guess.
Right. Just, yeah. You start out on Illmatic, where do you go from there?
Yeah, it's like, I think the hype was just too big. That's probably it.
Yeah.
But he's a very good rapper, and that album is very nice. Oh, and like, so one of the producers on Illmatic was Pete Rock.
Oh,
and
yeah.
My favorite song on Do or Die was produced by Pete Rock. It's called Rather Unique. That song kind of feels like Illmatic.
Right.
In a way.
Right. I'm switching up my list right now. So I'm gonna go for a twofer here a little bit. So yes, call me out, I'm cheating, but so originally I thought maybe Uncle Tupelo. Alt country, very late 80s, early 90s. I think they're underrated, but they're not the ones I'm gonna call out, because I think that after they split up, they became not underrated, because when they split up, two other bands formed. One of them being Wilco, which Jeff Tweedy and Wilco obviously could never be considered underrated.
Right.
In my opinion, they're overrated. But the other band that came out of Uncle Tupelo, I think, is way underrated, and that is Sun Volt.
Yeah.
And their album Trace, to me, is a must-have in a collection.
Yeah.
Like, that is an album I can listen to over and over again. Tear-Stained Eye and Genevieve, and just, God, it's so damn good. And if you like that alt country sound, The lead singer has a super unique tone to his voice. And they've put out a few albums. They've had a good career, but it's always Wilco that gets the
Yeah.
top billing there, and Sun Volt kind of gets forgotten.
Mm.
But damn, even if Trace was the only album they released, it doesn't get enough credit for how
They're still
good
worth
of an
mentioning.
album.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so, Uncle Tupelo, I think originally was probably an underrated band, but after they broke up and the continuation of alt country that they kind of started, other groups that I are on my list also, like the Jayhawks or Lucinda Williams, or stuff along those lines. That whole alt country scene, I think, is underrated for really good tunes. But Sun Volt to me is like the most tragically underrated of that genre, because just the album Trace alone is definitely worth a listen, and it should be up there as kind of an iconic album, I think.
Yeah. That happens a lot though, like getting overshadowed by the other offshoot,
Yes.
Like a big one for me is, At the Drive-In
Right.
became Mars Volta and Sparta.
Right.
And I love Sparta.
Yeah. But Mars Volta took the...
Yeah, Sparta just kind of got, shoved aside.
Right.
But that first album's awesome. Like, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of bands like that, I mean, obviously the iconic one is Mother Love Bone. And I thought about putting them on my list, but they only released one album, and it's really the late 80s. But when Mother Love Bone broke up, it's Pearl Jam, Soundgarden.
Right.
Yeah. And neither of them overshadowed each other because they're both friggin' phenomenal and iconic.
Yeah, they're massive.
Yeah. But, is Mother Love Bone? Well, I don't know. If you look at it, really, now people are like, well, you got to look at Mother Love Bone if you want to see the birth of grunge and stuff like that. So that's why I didn't really put Uncle Tupelo on the list.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
What about Snot?
Snot.
Who was in... I think like the Sepultura guy was in Snot or something. Snot got totally overlooked, bro. Snot was really good.
Sun Volt, Trace, great album.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before, but you introduced me to both of them, Uncle Tupelo and Sun Volt.
I do remember
it was definitely
that.
Sun Volt, yeah.
Well, Uncle Tupelo, I do remember because you went on a deep dive, like you were all the time like, oh, Uncle Tupelo.
I really liked Uncle Tupelo. I mean, I liked Sun Volt too, but there was something about the Uncle Tupelo, like I just fell in love with it. I really liked it a lot.
Yeah.
I was listening to it a lot. Yeah.
They're fantastic. They're amazing.
And I found some CD when I went back to Houston. I can't remember what it is, but
okay.
I still have it somewhere.
Anodyne or something.
Ah, that's it. Yeah, Anodyne. Yeah. Anodyne.
So good.
All right, I'll throw in my one rock thing.
Okay.
And I'm kind of cheating. Actually, I kind of thought about mentioning Sparta, but I took them off the list, but I got to mention them, so that's cool. Because it's only one album, so it doesn't really count to me.
Right.
And it wasn't the 90s. It wasn't the 90s.
Yeah.
Okay. I just realized that now. It's good that I took them off the list. And this is the one that I said might be kind of cheating.
Okay.
But it's a fair choice. Well, so they're stadium rockers in Europe. Placebo.
Okay.
So hear me out. Yeah.
No, I'm probably going to agree with you here because But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So obviously they have a very good career going for them in Europe. and they can do world tours. They can play in the States too.
Yeah.
But in general, unless you're a fan, in general, they're one-hit wonders in the States,
True.
basically, right?
True.
And I was speaking to my friend Ian about this. He doesn't really like Placebo, but as somebody who lived in the UK and as a music journalist, he kind of agrees that they didn't really get treated very fairly, even in Europe or even in the UK. The critics always kind of like bad-mouthed them or made fun of them or whatever, you know.
Yep.
Oasis and Blur and all these other bands are getting all the hype and they're getting sent overseas. And while he doesn't like Placebo, he kind of agrees that, like, you know, they did get big in the UK, but they also kind of got shat on in a way. You know, they're not as famous in the States as they should be at all.
No, and this is an interesting point that it's like underrated where.
Exactly.
Because on my list, and they're separated into a little cluster, because in the UK, not underrated.
Yeah.
But in the US, I think horribly underrated, and that is Primal Scream, Happy Mondays, The
Oh, there you go.
In
Yeah.
Spiral Carpets. Like that whole Manchester Britpop kind of mix that really went ignored in the United States. I mean, there were a few groups. EMF had Unbelievable, and Jesus Jones had a song or two, but I was like you with this one, where I was like, I have Primal Scream, Happy Mondays, The Farm, and In Spiral Carpets at the bottom of my list, separated because they were huge in the UK. So it's like, are they underrated?
Yeah.
But in the US, I think they're horribly underrated. I think the whole genre is underrated.
Yeah.
And didn't get a fair shake. So I don't think that Placebo is necessarily cheating, because,
and especially after Ian told me that, you know, they didn't necessarily get treated that well in the UK either, I was like, oh, okay, well then I'm gonna put it on.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's fair. I really get into that era of British rock. The Charlatans, I think, are fantastic. The Boo Radleys, Corner Shop, all just that whole era had some phenomenal stuff that was overlooked. And
yeah, because everybody was
a
listening
little later, but great.
Everybody overlooked the stuff you just mentioned because they were too busy listening to the Smiths. I know.
I actually don't mind the Smiths, but the Smiths
I've made people. Sorry, go ahead.
The Smiths are significantly earlier, by the way.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
The Smiths are 80s.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I've made people seriously angry with my Smiths comments. Smiths?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'll be in a pub surrounded by like British people.
Yes.
And I'm just like, fuck the Smiths. And like, no, it's like it becomes a thing.
Yeah.
That I have to like listen to. Like, I mean, like they're yelling at me. They're mad, you know.
There is a generation, it's my generation, I think, who, man, the Smiths, the Stone Roses, Joy Division, like, you do not badmouth those three groups. They will all agree that Morrissey is a complete fuckwit.
Oh, of course.
But like Johnny Marr's guitar work in the Smiths, I mean, he's unbelievable, right? You can't deny that. It's just,
I like Johnny Marr.
My hatred, it's not a hatred. I just think that the Smiths are overrated, and a lot of it I just do not like Morrissey. Since you put your one rock one on there, I'm going to put my one rap one on here.
Nice. Let's go.
So I'm a huge fan of what they call the native tongues.
Yeah.
And the native tongues, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, Jungle Brothers, and then kind of what was considered like the bastard younger brother, Black Sheep. And I think Black Sheep should get just as much recognition as De La Soul and A Tribe Called Quest.
Yeah.
Their first album, A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing,
It's a
phenomenal.
classic.
It's
Yeah.
classic. And maybe in that way they're not underrated. But when you talk about that style of hip hop in that era, Black Sheep never come up. Or when you say Native Tongues, even people who are familiar with the Native Tongues will be like, oh yeah, it's De La Soul and Tribe Called Quest. Who else?
You're right. Yeah.
And it's like, well, Jungle Brothers and Black Sheep were like, it was the four of them. And then if you wanted to go further, you could include Queen Latifah,
Busta Rhymes.
Busta Rhymes, because
Was
he
he?
because he made his debut with Tribe. So you know, maybe Moni Love was in there. Yeah, like Black Sheep, I think gets overlooked, but the samples they chose, like they're definitely within that style of hip hop. They were just dirtier. They were more unrefined, I guess, lyrically than I think the others, and that made them stand out. And that album should get more credit, and they should get more credit within that particular style of hip hop.
They were one of the albums that always came up. Like when I first started digging, you know, Googling like most underrated hip hop albums of all time or whatever, like they were on all of those lists. Like that album, that first
Really?
album was at, yeah, it's like people agree with you for sure. Like,
Yeah.
Like most slept on albums or whatever, you know, they're on those lists.
So good. I mean, I got the fever for the flavor. Such a good song. The Choice Is Yours. Great song.
Didn't they only had 2 albums?
I think
or
so.
something?
They didn't have many.
It was short. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking with my brother this morning, and I was like, most underrated. And we had this debate, but what's underrated? Like, blah, 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 blah. And I said Black Sheep. And there's just this throwaway little, like, tiny thing on that album that my brother started singing. And it's just a sample of them going, a fuck you, a fuck you, a fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, a fuck you, a fuck. And my brother, like, that's the only song he remembers from the album. I'm like, yeah, figures.
It's memorable. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, that's a good choice. They are pretty underrated. Like I've heard that album, but it's not in my memory. So like I'm guilty too. You know?
Right? It's a killer album, and they're underrated in that, like, when I talk about rap and hip hop, you obviously have so much more knowledge than I do. But for me, that was the height of hip hop, right? Native Tongues. Yeah. So I said Blind Melon, Jellyfish, Sunvolt, and then Black Sheep. So that's 4 for me. Yeah.
So I had Above the Law, and then AZ, and then Placebo. I'm gonna choose Gangsta Boo, female gangster rapper.
Okay.
Who she was part of the sort of legendary Memphis rap collective group called 3-6 Mafia.
Yep.
She came out with Inquiring Minds, plain and simple. Like it's a Memphis, Tennessee rap classic, and she's just super good. A lot of people agree with me that she's a really awesome rapper, but she doesn't really get celebrated quite as much as she should. She still has a very good career. Like she's like kind of famous.
I've heard of her.
Yeah.
Mainly because I read the book.
Yeah, she was in there. It's like she's kind of famous. She gets featured on some cool indie stuff still. She still puts out like mixtapes and EPs and stuff. And it's like hip hop heads know that she's really cool, but it's like not enough. Like everybody agrees that it's just like not enough.
And like we've talked about in the past, that rap generally has not given the women the props they deserve
Yeah.
as legitimate rap artists, right? They've
Yeah.
always been kind of, there's only one in our posse, or it seems like a novelty, but there's some phenomenal female rappers.
Yeah.
All right. My last one. Now, this is where I have trouble. Collective Soul. I think they're way underrated, although I think there'd be people who would tell me that they had significant enough success that you couldn't consider them underrated. My brother called them a one-hit wonder this morning, and I was like, what are you talking about, man? They had more than one hit. But I don't think that they got enough credit. Another band that got lumped into the whole grunge movement, but they were almost considered to be too polished and maybe not angry enough, like not sullen enough.
Yeah.
And interestingly, some people consider them Christian rock. Songs like Shine and stuff definitely have that element lyrically to what they're doing. But I mean, the song, their first album, Hints, Allegations, and Things Left Unsaid, I think is great. Their second album might even be better. And the song The World That I Know, to me is just like lyrically, the audio, I just love that song. And even later ones like Dosage and stuff like that, they just consistently put out great albums. And I think that they're often forgotten now, you know, and even when they had their hits out, they never stuck in people's minds.
Yeah, they were kind of just thrown in there a little bit.
Yeah. And I think they deserved a lot more. I think that maybe some of their stuff was kind of grunge, but really good songwriting, and they're a really solid band that I think most people are just like, meh, Collective Soul, really? Meh, what? Meh. And I'm like, no, listen to it. Like, this is legit good stuff that should be recognized for being better.
Yeah.
So that's my fifth one.
My last one is probably what a lot of people will just kind of agree. This is probably, in general, the most underrated rapper, just like period.
Okay.
His name is Masta Ace, and he was part of the Juice Crew, which was a collective that had like Biz Markie and Cool G Rap and Masta Ace and Craig G. But yeah, Biz Markie, I know you like him.
I do.
His recording career didn't start until 1990, so it counts. In the 90s, he was in Masta Ace Incorporated.
Oh.
It was like his kind of group. And, you know, they released an album kind of shooting back at gangster rap, you know. All the violence is increasing because of hip hop. You know, they released a concept album to kind of like make fun of that.
Right.
And that was, I think, probably his biggest selling album. But a lot of like his storytelling and his flow has influenced a lot of rappers, including Eminem. Like, huge influence on Eminem. Like just the style of rapping and the way the stories are unfolded and stuff, and like the concepts, you know.
Right.
But yeah, he's had a very strong indie career. Every album is awesome. He has like his core fans, you know. Masta Ace Incorporated had some decent success, but then as a solo rapper, when he went back to being a solo rapper,
right,
just classic, amazing albums that like critics liked, you know, like the critics liked it, the fans liked it, but then who else?
Right,
you know?
right.
And so he's always been like known, but kind of overlooked.
Just didn't have the crossover appeal, I guess.
Yeah. And like I said, he's influenced a lot of people. But yeah, people should check out Masta Ace for sure.
I will be checking him out.
And even though it's not in the 90s, I mean, check out the 90s albums of Masta Ace Incorporated, but also one that's not in the 90s, A Long Hot Summer.
Okay.
It's, again, a lot of his stuff is just a concept album, and this one's like the story of him starting off as like a young rapper, and like he's working with this like asshole manager, and it's just like a story. It's a
Oh,
whole
cool.
story. And A Long Hot Summer, that's kind of like the basic theme of Do the Right Thing, isn't it? The movie
Yes.
Do the Right Thing, like one really hot day or something.
Yep.
So interesting.
I'm gonna just rifle off some honorable mentions of groups that I would put on here. Living Color.
Okay.
They didn't make my list because arguably they had a pretty big career. But I think they could have bigger. G Love and Special Sauce. I mean, you can't have enough cold beverages and Baby's Got Sauce. The Jayhawks, I think I already mentioned. Sunny Day Real Estate.
Okay, I'm on board.
Urban Dance Squad. And they may fall under the one-hit wonder list, but they had a great song called Deeper Shade of Soul. And I was way into them for that album. And then their second album I thought was really cool, really different. Different than anything that was coming out in the early 90s. Way different. My brother made me remember Soul Coughing. Great band. Morphine, I think, was underrated. Their instrumentation was really interesting. School of Fish had this great song called 3 Strange Days, and the album that was on was really good. And then they just kind of fizzled out. And then, got to put them on here, 311.
Okay. Underrated.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that counts. Yeah, that counts because it's just their core fans,
right?
And people should like them at least a little bit more.
I agree.
Yeah.
But then I also I was thinking two groups, the Gin Blossoms and Hootie and the Blowfish, who were definitely not underrated in the 90s, but now get very, very little credit, especially Hootie and the Blowfish. People are like, oh my God, Hootie and the Blow, you know, like Hootie. And Darius Rucker has done phenomenal as a solo artist.
He's a country singer now.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that history has not been kind to the Gin Blossoms and Hootie and the Blowfish, therefore making them a bit underrated in the long term. But it was hard to justify putting them tops of a list
when they were
underrated
mega.
when they were mega hits in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, they were like festival headliners probably, right?
Yes, most definitely.
At least once.
Right?
You know?
Well, I saw Counting Crows on some list of underrated bands of the 90s. I'm like, how are they underrated?
No, they're fine. We don't need to.
So
don't need to mention.
So that's how I finish mine up.
Yeah. I'm just going to mention one because I was talking to Ian, the guy who I was talking to about Placebo with. He's also the Guided by Voices guy. So, you know, I was like, what about Guided by Voices? You know, are they underrated? Are they underrated? And he's like, no, they're exactly where we want them to be. You know? and I was like, yeah. And I think Robert Pollard would agree.
Right.
The people that know about them. And the people that don't should, but screw them, you know? Right. It's like Guided by Voices is Guided by Voices, and that is perfect, you know?
Yes.
Like, so they're rated fine. They're rated perfectly. They're exactly where we need them. So
there were others that I had thought of, like Helmet, I think is underrated, but then are they?
And I thought about Hum. Is that kind of a similar thing?
Yeah, right? Like,
yeah.
So, but while doing this, I think I may have an idea for our next topic. So I was looking at all these bands, and one band that I came across was Temple of the Dog. And as you know, Temple of the Dog was put together, the former members of Mother Love Bone, along with Eddie Vedder, and they put out a tribute album to Andrew Wood, who was the lead singer of Mother Love Bone, who had died of a drug overdose before whatever. Anyway, but it made me start thinking super groups. Like, what are the 5 best groups that are like side projects or made from members of other great bands?
Mhm.
That's a good topic, isn't it? But yeah, what do you think? Top 5 supergroups.
I like it.
And I think it forces us to move beyond the stuff we keep mentioning all the time,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
we haven't mentioned any supergroups.
I like it.
All right, let's do that.
Super groups.
Supergroups.
Cool.